Okay, welcome to lesson 2 of Hebrew. I'm so glad you're back. How did you feel about lesson 1?
Good.
Good? You feeling comfortable with pronouncing things when you're reading them?
Pretty good.
I think you sound good when I listen to you, so that's wonderful. Okay. So let's turn to lesson 2.
Okay.
Were you able to finish all of the practice pages in lesson 1?
Yes.
Okay. So in lesson 2, we don't meet any new vowels. So that's nice. We can sort of relax from trying to memorize vowels and consonants at the same time. I think there are a total, I can even check on here, let me count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. There are actually 18 vowels in Hebrew. Okay? They don't make 18 completely, totally different sounds, more variants on sounds, and they can be grouped into vowels that sort of sound like our letter A, which the English letter A has several different sounds that it makes, short, long, and whatever it's called when it makes that ah sound. And our E has several different sounds it can make, and our I has several sounds that it can make, and our O and our U. So in Hebrew, they group around our 5 vowels in English, and we have some that make A sounds, and some that make E sounds, some that make I sounds, some that make O, some that make U, and some that make combinations. Like in English, we say that Y is sometimes a vowel, A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y, we learned in elementary school. That Y comes into play with our Hebrew vowels too. But tonight, we don't have to learn any new ones. So do you remember the vowels that we've already done without looking in your book?
Yeah.
Do you remember what they are?
Kamatz.
Kamatz.
It's like a tiny little dot with a line over it.
Yes. So it's a line like this, and you can kind of just do that. But when you're trying to see from the camera, I'm going to make that a little bolder because some people have told me it's difficult to see from the back of the room. And the name of it is Kamatz. And there's a lot of different ways that we can spell Kamatz. That's probably not one of them. There's another one that starts with a Q. But the spelling to transliterate it into English is not the thing that I worry about the most. Mostly I am concerned that you know what this shape is that you're calling Kamatz. So that when you're trying to spell something, you can say the name of the consonant and then say, and it has a kamatz underneath. And that other people will understand your word kamatz. Doesn't matter how you spell kamatz, it matters that they know to put this symbol underneath of it. Do you remember what sound kamatz makes?
A-Y.
Not A-Y, it makes an ah,
A-H.
A-H, ah sound, yeah.
A-H.
So it makes an ah sound. And there are some people who would say, well, yes, but no. But I have found that it's far easier for a beginning student will just call it an ah sound. Don't worry about any other variation whatsoever. Let it be an ah and be comfortable with it. That's okay. Do you remember any other vowel? We have one other that we've learned.
At the top, and it's just a tiny little, like a dash.
Like a dash. And it could end up being fairly significant looking like that. And again, the spelling is controversial. That's how I've spelled it. And it doesn't matter how you remember, but how I remember is a P for physician, and it's a patak, and a physician uses a tongue blade. And when she places the tongue blade on your tongue, they ask you to say, ah. So it also has an ah sound. And this is what I mean by, yes, there are some differences if you were what's called a sabra, which is someone born in Israel, a native Hebrew speaker, not somebody who came from another nation, because certainly Israel is a very large melting pot of different nations. But now we're getting far enough along in the history of the new nation of Israel that we now have quite a number of sabra peoples who have been born in Israel, who have grown up speaking Hebrew. And if they're taught properly, there are some differences between ah and ah. but nobody expects us who are not Sabra to use them.
Does it matter which one you use? Which one of those
Yes.
you use underneath
Yes.
certain consonants?
And that has to do with spelling. Just like if I was to spell heel like this, you would know what that means. But if I spelled heel like this, you would also know what it means. Because I used a different vowel, it changed the word. And that's true of Hebrew as well. So that's the reason that I like to teach you the names of the vowels so that you can spell things correctly. But you'll find very quickly that I don't know which vowel goes with it, and I have to ask you, what vowels are underneath of there? And then I'll draw them, because here in this class, I'll never ask you to try to pronounce words on purpose with no vowels. We might occasionally do it as a game to see, could you guess? But not at lesson 2, that's for sure. Okay? All right, so we have 2 vowels, and we don't have any new ones tonight. So tonight we have 2 new letters. And in our new letters, this one is named in your book. What page number are we on?
It starts on page 7.
On page 7. So on page 7, we have a picture of these 2 new consonants, and they give us the name. But in this particular book, they don't give us the names of the vowels. So that's why I like to review those as we're going on. But our first new letter is this word, dalet. Okay? And dalet looks kind of like a door. And this is how I draw it. I go straight across, I come back, I come down. Okay? So in our book, it kind of looks like this. They go out and they kind of do a swirl like that. It doesn't really matter. It's just a writing style. The most important point is that we do have a definite something off the back. But in our book, it's sometimes a little bit difficult to see. And the reason I'm making a particular point about that is later we're going to meet another letter that I'm not going to tell you about tonight, except to mention that there is another letter that looks very similar to the dalet. We're going to run into that many different times where a letter looks similar, but there's something that distinguishes it. So tonight, as we're talking about the dalet, this is what distinguishes the dalet. It might be that it's a heavier mark out here as well, but in truth, that there's something sticking off the end. Not always easy to see, but it's there. Even like this one that I drew, if I hadn't mentioned that to you, you might not have seen that as part sticking off, okay? But it is definitely there, all right? And if Pam has a chance, she'll talk about that letter some more in pictographic, and you'll see why that is shaped the way it is. But one way to remember it is that it kind of looks like a door, and this is the upper part of the wall where the door is hooked on, and that's the edge of the door coming down. So door and a D for dalet, sort of like a P for physician for Pataki. It's just a trick. You can use any trick that works well for you. It does not matter. And as a student, you can, any tool at all that works for you to try to help you remember. But do you remember our rule for how we would know what the dalet sound is going to be? The very first letter of the word gives us a clue how the sound of the letter is going to be. So doing that, we know that this sound is going to be what? Duh. Right. Now, not da, and not D, and not day, which a lot of people make that mistake. They either do one of 2 things. They either call this a dalet and they try to say dalet for its sound, or they put a vowel sound with it instead of just saying d. So that's a common mistake, but I haven't seen that in use, so that's good. Okay. So our second letter that we're going to work on tonight is named Gimel. And Gimel, you'll see come up. A lot of people are more familiar with Gimel because it's part of a game that's played at Hanukkah. And Gimel is on the spinning dreidel. It's one of the symbols on the dreidel, and it has a word that it stands for and so forth and so on. And as we, in a year, reach back to Hanukkah, you'll see that for sure, and you may see it long before then. But Gimel is the next letter. And Gimel, oh, you can say it's a giraffe. I like that. Other people like to see it as a person going. They see this as the head of the person, and these are the person's legs, and they're going. So whatever tool you want to get that G as a part of the reminder to help you remember that it's a Gimel, great. Doesn't matter, whatever works for you. So knowing that our trick of the first letter tells us the sound of the letter, what would be the sound of Gimel? G. Right. So now we're going to go back to our vowels that we learned last week. And we're going to, just for fun, put a Gimel. Let me make it a little darker so the people in the back can see. And some people will draw the Gimel like this. They'll come straight down like this and then put a line out like that. That's fine. That's fine. I just did like that. One thing you will notice is that this is a fairly short line. So if that's his head and he's going, that makes sense to me also, or the giraffe's head or whatever. But whether you draw it this way or whether you draw it that way is just a penmanship issue. So if we put a Gimel and we put a kamatz underneath and a patak underneath, what would we get?
Ga, ga,
Ga, ga. Can you blend it together?
ga,
Gaga.
gaga.
Gaga. Okay. So I'm going to change colors of ink pen and ask if you remember the technique of looking through a Hebrew word. Do you remember that technique?
Yes, start at the right,
Mm-hmm.
go up.
And go up, and we're looking for any clues that might be out there. And at this point, there aren't any, and I don't expect you to find any because I haven't taught you any yet. But when we're learning the technique,
Right.
we start out there, and then where do we go?
Then you go across and you come back down through
Right.
that first letter.
And we're looking up here, any clues there, any clues out here first. Okay, and then we're reading the letter,
Through.
and then we're reading the vowel. Then we've got to come up in between because you don't know it yet, but later we might meet something in between the letters. And I'll tell you this because a lot of times people say, well, I'm not going to tell you that because you're a child, but I'm teaching adults. And when I teach adults, I teach it a little bit differently. So sometimes I tell you some things, and it's not important that you remember it because it's not now. But now you'll know the reason why. And the truth is, sometimes a vowel is down here. Most usually, the vowel is down here. But every once in a while, the vowel is here in the middle. And as we learn the vowel that does that, that'll make sense.
And if it's in the middle, which letter does it refer to?
It refers to the letter before it.
Okay.
Okay? And then, so then we're coming up here and we're checking here to see if there's any clues up there. And we're going down through this letter and we're looking at this vowel. And then we have to look at the back as well, just in case. So it's very much an up and down visualization. And do you remember that I told you in English, we actually do that also. But we do it because we've done it for so long. So many of us just sort of do it automatically. So we look at the word cake, and if we were just reading this word, we would say khaki. But we don't. We let our eyes go, woo, oh, that's going to be a long A. But we don't even stop to think about it. We just know that there's an E. It's a silent E. It's on the end. And if we're in first grade, we get totally messed up because we forget that. We don't know that rule well yet. But eventually, it becomes fairly easy for most English readers, and they're able to let their eyes scan ahead. And because they're reading contextually also, and they're reading about the birthday party, and the cake that was served at the birthday party, then they'll be seeing the word cake, and they don't know a word khaki that starts with C, so that makes sense, and they'll call it cake appropriately. But that's context. And most of us at this level of Hebrew have no context whatsoever. We can't do it. So we have to depend on some other rules and regulations to help us get it in order. All right, so let me see here whether we want to do anything more with our page on the board. Is anything in particular confusing to you? Is there any question that you've stumbled across?
The only confusion I had was on the last page.
Okay, you had a confusion on the last page,
Yeah.
which is page
Where it
number,
shows the challah bread,
yes,
it
on
says write the keywords
page number 12. Okay.
Write the keywords you know in their correct places. I wasn't sure what to put there. The other one was obvious. It's dog, which is fish.
Good. Okay.
But this one, I did not know a word for, so I just put the only word that I know associated with it.
And what
which
word
is
did you put?
Shabbat.
Yes, and you did it exactly correctly. So what you did was put Shabbat on the challah bread, and you put dog, which is fish, on
Yeah.
the platter of
Is that
fish,
right?
and that is exactly right. Up at the top of our page, each time we have keywords. Last week's keyword was Shabbat.
Yeah.
So where it asks us to write our keyword, I think that's what it says, finish setting the Shabbat table, write the keywords that you know.
Oh, those-
So that was perhaps a
That was
clue that you
only
might have picked up on,
keyword, yeah.
because we only have 2 keywords so far.
go.
But in each lesson, we'll have some keywords. Last week we had 1. This week we have 1. Gradually we'll have a few more. Okay?
Well, they
So
actually they gave another one too.
they probably gave a cool Hebrew word.
Yeah.
A cool Hebrew word is not a keyword.
Okay.
The keyword is at the top of the page
Yeah.
each time, and they repeat it as each lesson. And then the cool Hebrew word is mostly for fun, although actually they do come back to it, and we can begin to use those. We might find them like in the story
Yes.
at the beginning of the lesson, where we alternate back and forth between Hebrew and English, which is sort of a challenge. But it's an opportunity to learn a few sociological things, a few rabbinical ideas. It's not scripture. It more gives us a clue into the traditional, usually Orthodox family, because this book is written for 3rd graders, very likely coming from a Reformed or an Orthodox family, and they are familiar with those things. They know that on Shabbat they have challah bread, and they know they have dog, fish meal. Part of the meal would be fish. So those things are familiar. They may not be as familiar to me or to you, but that's how they arrive at it. And a few times there are things that are really confusing to us as English speakers and as Americans, because we just simply don't know those things. So I give you some clues and some hints, and we get through it, and we're just not perfect. We just have to kind of guess what the writers of this text were thinking about. Okay, so I think we're ready to go to our reading groups. So I'm going to turn off the microphone. And if you are listening by YouTube and you are doing these lessons in the workbook, you should try to do the following lessons on page 10 and 11 and 12. And try to fill those in, and they're pretty self-explanatory. But if you are doing this by YouTube, I really highly recommend that you read out loud to someone who can hear your pronunciations, because if you don't say the sounds, you don't really gain any confidence in reading Hebrew. And you can see and recognize Hebrew, but you have to practice letting it come out. And as we go further along and we enter into other letters, you're going to find out that you really can't pronounce certain letters inside your head and read silently. You might know what it means, but you can't really say it because it's a twist of your tongue. So it's a really great idea right here at the beginning to get near somebody who understands some Hebrew enough that you can say, may I read these Hebrew words to you and give me some correction on my pronunciation. Remembering that the reading page is not words. There might be just a couple of words, but early on, with only 5 letters to our name, we don't have a whole lot of words that we can say. So a lot of them are simply sounds. So if you hear something like Bob, that isn't the man's name for Robert. His nickname is Bob. It's just a set of sounds, and that's all we're trying to do. And we do that in English as well, where we're just phonetically sounding things out and learning how words go, how sounds go together, and eventually they will become words. So we'll go to our reading groups. Thanks.